What would you do if you saw somebody spanking their child for bad behavior? One time I went out to brunch with a friend, his wife and 6-year-old. When we got in the car, the kid was being whiny and didn't want to buckle up. His dad threatened him with a whooping if he didn't settle down. Kid still complained and the dad turned the kid around and gave him a light tap on the butt. I just kinda sat there and helped with the seatbelt when the kid complied. Okay, look, here's the thing. I am a white lady who works with kids in parts of a city where I am not of the same cultural background as the families I work with. I walk a very fine line between being a resource for kids who are genuinely being abused or mistreated and respecting the fact that there are cultural differences in widely accepted parenting practices. Additionally, there's a long history of biased child protective services involvement with communities of color, and often the parents I work with are under significant duress and coping with their kids as best they can with the tools they have. So, all that is a long way of saying, when I witness spanking from a family that is largely loving and they clearly just have a different view of effective discipline than I have, I butt out, but try to model other strategies that may or may not work for them. But I have called child protective services when, for instance, a parent who kept cursing at her 5-year-old and calling him stupid then hit him across the face. But I always feel like I'm on a tightrope, trying to balance respect for the parents I work with and being able to be part of a village that protects and cares for vulnerable kids. Had a neighbor who would swat her kids and yell at them. One day she grabbed one of them by his arm and angled him at an awkward angle and just started smacking his ass like she was trying to break it off. I didn't know WTF to do, so I started shouting, "Hey child abuser," like when people shout "Hey bear" at a bear. She threw the kid into the car like a rag doll and charged at my porch, pointing in my face and screeching threats. Bunch of neighbors called the cops and she was still threatening me while I just sat there when the cops arrived. CPS got involved. BC turns out they starved their kids on Christmas while they ate, so if they were going full ham on a kid, I guess I'd shout to distract them and hope someone was calling the cops. I personally try to avoid it, but I've got kids that aren't neurotypical and they can get out of control so easily, like sticking their fingers in PowerPoints or running in front of cars or hurting people. Rarely used, a smack puts them into shutdown mode. It activates a sense of anxiety they don't otherwise have about risk-taking. The rest of the time they get put into a timeout. I would stand up, square and true, don my fedora mighty, and announce in a loud clear voice, "Halt, I am a redditor, moderator, hopeful, and knower of all things. Thou shalt refrain from such acts immediately, lest ye be banned." Then I would give them a lecture about how they're doing it wrong, and how our science told me that spanking kids is bad, and if they still kept it up, I'd lock their subreddit for 48 hours in protest. But seriously, nothing. Some kids need a whack on the side of the head. Credit Reddit Edit. Whack on the head is how I refer to getting people to smarten up. No, I'm not talking about hitting a kid on the head. Yes, spanking involved the butt. I'd feel bad for both the child and the parent. Kids can be exhausting little demons, impossible to be disciplined, but humiliation and pain will never be the best answer. And I hope there were more effective ways of dealing with kids when they act up. From the perspective of someone who was regularly hit as a kid and knows lots of people who were also disciplined like that, in my country it's pretty normal to take it to an extreme that would be considered abuse in other places, and almost everyone is okay with that. It did more harm than good. Maybe it helped dealing with a tantrum every now and then, but also lead to me purposefully teasing my mother to see how far she'd get and holding back tears or laughing it off to infuriate her even more. Also, when dealing with older kids and teens, hitting them only becomes a way to shut them up when questioning their parents, or for adults to get the way out of actually reasoning with a kid who is perfectly capable of doing so. It messes me up a little to read things like "I was hit by my parents as a kid and I turned out good. Deal with it without being a wasp. Good for you. I wish I could have dealt with it as well as you did. But I feel sad and guilty that looking back at my childhood I remember feeling more resentment than love towards my mother." Also, knowing kids that are terrified of their parents is just awful. As a mom, I mostly feel sorry for the parent when their child is being naughty and they get a smack or are yelled at. Because I know firsthand how hard it is when your child is being a twat, especially in public. Honestly, sometimes even the best communication doesn't work. When your child knows they're doing the wrong thing, they've been told to stop but don't. I agree that a light smack on the bum is warranted. I am a wooden spoon survivor and I love my parents. I turned out great. Even after getting a smack, my 4-year-old daughter will apologize for doing the wrong thing and cuddle me. Yeah, but the research is a bit interesting, like the one that looked at twins where one twin was disciplined all the time while the other wasn't. I think everyone who actually read that one was pretty much like WTF. Of course, the one who was punished while the other wasn't is going to be more screwed up. The most interesting one I read was on when to stop whipping your kids. I think it was you shouldn't need to pass I think 8 or 9. Which made sense because that's when you can start having a hope of dialogue and the negative reinforcement of sudden pain becomes a less effective tool. I saw a man whose kid tried to walk the wrong way up a slide, grabbed him and started slapping his ass saying no 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 several times. The kid clearly had no clue what he had even done wrong. I just looked at him with a quizzical expression and shouted, "Whoa, what are you doing?" I couldn't believe it. So openly in a public park. You can't ignore this stuff. What would people do if they saw someone beat their dog? Honestly, just say not my problem. If you treat kids worse than that, shame on you. If it were a brief spank and the child didn't seem to be that negatively affected, I would be disturbed but give them the benefit of the doubt due to people having different views on what disciplinary tactics are ethical to employ on a child. If it were prolonged spanking and the child was crying, screaming in pain, I would not be able to ignore that in good conscience and take necessary action to intervene. If it's similar to how I spank my kid, pretty much a pat on the butt with the warnings and build-up that makes her think it hurts, then I just avoid making the parent feel like they're getting judged. If it's a beating, I will find a way to intervene. I definitely will not subject my daughter to the beatings and belts that I got when I was growing up, but the threat of a spanking with a very mild swat goes a long way to rein in her behavior. She has been pretty good for my grandma ever since she got a kick in the butt, aka a nudge with the toe of her shoe. A sample size of 40. Wow. You can instantly throw that study straight in the trash the second you see that, along with 95% of all the other studies that are poorly done. Studies are not good evidence. People are starting to wise up to that fact, but still a lot of people out there believing that they are. Yeah, these people actually joke they'd help while saying being spanked didn't affect them. Clearly, if you think hitting anyone to control them regardless of age is okay, the spanking in your life clearly fucked you up. The most awful part is these people don't realize that and see it as justifiable, acceptable, even funny. I don't agree with spanking, and when I have seen it in public I have made very deliberate eye contact with the parent. I see you. We all see you, so tread carefully. I was not spanked as a child. I was taught to rationalize my feelings and to be responsible for my behavior. How can you teach a child that hitting is wrong while you are hitting them? To my mind, this only undermines you as a parent. There is definitely a difference between discipline and punishment. I am a parent also. I know how tense things can get. Breathe FFS. Maybe if you hadn't been spanked, you'd have other ways of dealing with stressful situations / conflict / upset. If I could somehow overcome my own revulsion, I would ideally ask if there's something I could do to help, whether it's to give the parent a few minutes to calm down, or to distract the child. I was with a friend at a park who was losing it with his sons whining, and my friend's voice was getting louder and louder. My kids were older and could enjoy the park without my constant attention, so I asked his little guy whether he wanted to run around the fountain. Crew was cleaning it and all kids had to vacate with me. After a while I stopped running. Little guy kept running around, totally happy and no longer whining. My friend had a chance to take a few deep breaths to recenter himself. I came from a family where our parents hit us, using hands, slippers, belts, and I remember my dad punching my sister in the face. If you didn't cry, the hitting didn't stop. I didn't spank my kids. Instead, when it got to be too much, I would put myself or my child in timeout. It wasn't punishment, it was a time for each of us to take a few deep breaths. It took longer to get stuff done in some ways, but I learned that my kids just needed transition time. So, I learned to use a kitchen timer. We're leaving in 15 minutes to run an errand. When this timer thinks, it will be time to go potty, wash hands, and out the door we go. I had to be creative, but we rarely yelled and we didn't spank. Fellow wooden spoon survivor here. The fear of discipline is a good motivator. I don't doubt that I deserved it every time. The fact that kids are now calling the cops on their own parents is sickening to me. I agree that this current generation will be one of weaklings. My biggest concern is the lack of critical thinking skills and reading comprehension that kids seem to possess these days. I guess we'll see what develops in the next 10 or 20 years. Be pretty upset and maybe report them if I know their name. I know some people will give me shit, but in the end you are hitting your child. If you'd be upset seeing someone hit their dog, you should feel the same about a kid. Most children are acting out because they are children and don't have the capacity for emotional regulation yet. Hitting them is just teaching them to fear you and not express emotion. Depends on when and where it happened. If it happens at work and the state's laws don't define spanking, I'm a mandated reporter and will have to call it in, unless spanking is defined in the law and is allowed as a punishment. If I'm out in public and it's not going into physical abuse, there's not really much I can do. But, regardless of setting, if someone is hitting the shit out of a child and endangering them, you best bet all 5 feet of me is stepping in. Do I condone spanking? Absolutely not, and I will not be using it with my child, Ren. But I don't have the authority to tell someone else to not spank, and doing so in public isn't going to change anything. You're better off trying to educate. I'm a situation where the spanker doesn't feel threatened or shamed. You can tell out your stats all you want, but in a charged moment of emotions, the spanker is going to double down. Wow, this is not what I expected of Reddit. Everyone is a hero until they see spanking. It's none of my business. Even though most agree that spanking is harmful to children, it is linked to behavioral problems, lower IQ, mental illness, and incarceration. Study after study has shown that spanking does more harm than good. When parents use violence to modify behavior in children, they learn to use violence to modify behavior in pets and other children. Silence is acceptance. If I do not intervene, I am actively creating a space where people can hit their children. If in a park, I would speak up before something escalated into spanking, so long as I saw warning signs. When a parent yells at their child, it can help just to say, "I like his shoes. Where did you get those?" This interrupts the escalation and takes attention away from the child. If I saw a parent hitting their kid, I would say something about how other kids are witnesses and the spanking affects them too. I'd also make it clear that hitting a child is violence and it isn't acceptable at the park. If at a store or restaurant, I'd bring a manager into it. Most people don't want to be kicked out of this store for their behavior. Tell them to stop. No one has a right to hit anyone, and kids don't understand the difference between hitting and spanking. To them, their parents have hurt them. That can fuck with you for years into adulthood. And how come adults think it's fine to do this? Simply see, the kids are theirs, but to have it done back to them is unacceptable. I'll never understand that. Cue the downvotes and excuses. Thank you. I was spanked as a child and I didn't turn out fine. It doesn't make the kids respect you, it makes them scared of you. I hated my mother for years. She's since apologized. I often got into fights when I was a teenager because I learned from my own mother that if someone says or does something you don't like, it's okay to hit them. It's also why my sisters and I always used to hit each other. There are more effective ways of disciplining a child, ways that don't mess them up. Till children, spanking is accepted as a disciplinary action in the US. Personally, I would approach the adult, not in a judging way, being as discreet as I can, just mentioning that an adult shouldn't hit a child, and whatever the reaction is, de-escalating, walking away. not going further and not trying to win an argument, but for me it's important to react to any kind of violence to a child, so that when there's heavy abuse, I would also be prone to act. And of course you get downvoted because people don't get that assault is assault no matter who does it and why. Kids have rights and they have the right not to be manhandled like this, even from their parents. It can cause lasting damage in later life, but I guess the parent feeling powerful and effective in the moment matters more than someone feeling safe around them long term. I would step in and try to get the parent to calm down. Spanking is wrong as all it is intimidate the child and scare them into behaving. If your child has done something that makes you mad enough to spank them, wait until you are calmed down to discipline your child. Spanking is extremely antiquated and there are numerous other techniques that can be used to discipline your child without using fear as a control tactic. A regular spanking, not a beating. I'd quietly commend them on disciplining their child because they love them. My brother and I got quite the spankings when we were kids and we turned out just fine. As kids, if we were told to just stop, sometimes we would, but quite often we wouldn't. We would do things that could get ourselves in serious danger, lead to future failures in our life path, or turn into a habit that caused us to be little hellions and dirtbags in public. So every so often we get the old butt whooping, and that put an end to that. We were rockheads though, so sometimes it took a couple of times, lol. But eventually we changed our ways and wisened up. I love my mom and dad and I know they did it because they loved us. When my dad was younger, yes, he would do it out of anger and my mom would always pull him aside and ask if he was doing it out of anger or love. If he said anger, he would send us to our rooms until he could calm down and come back and discipline us from a perspective of love and caring rather than just being pissed off at us. But we still caught a few angry whoopings, lol, but we're fine. And these kids will be too. As we move away from harsher punishments like that or other creative ways, let's be honest, kids are getting snottier and more out of control. Just asking little Jimmy or Susie to stop it and behave doesn't always work. There are some kids you can do that with and that's great, but there are some kids you have to be harsher with. Take away a beloved item or toy, ground them. Other creative means of discipline, and sometimes, yes, a good old whack on the backside with an "I told you to stop." When you're out in public especially, kids need to learn to have some social graces and manners, and if they are just absolutely out of control, sometimes words alone don't work. Sometimes they need that firecracker pop on the booty to really wake them up and get them out of the zone, followed by some guidance and direction about how to behave in public. But then again, we all have our opinions and that's just mine. A million years ago, when I was a student teacher in a kindergarten class, one of the little girls got in trouble and her mom was called. Her mom came in the classroom, took her kid into the adjacent bathroom and spanked the daylights out of the girl. Myself and all of the other kids couldn't see it, but we could hear everything, and that poor girl was crying and miserable. The whole scene was terrible. Since then, I rarely call parents with bad behavior issues and try to handle it all at school instead. You never how a parent disciplines. You threaten to assault another person because they gave you a dirty look for abusing your daughter? It's people like you who shouldn't be allowed to have kids. How would you like it if someone hit you? You wouldn't. So what gives you the right to hit a child? Kids are human beings too. I hope that lady called the cops on you after she walked away. I can only hope there are enough people around to subdue me, otherwise it will go very, very badly for whoever's doing the spanking. Survivor of a violent upbringing myself, it's an almighty trigger and there's no telling what I do once the red fog descends. Happened only once, but I really don't care to go there again. I worked at a clothing store in Niagara Falls, and so I see a bunch of different cultures. Never actually seen someone hit their kid, but the amount of people that just talk down and harshly to their kids like a dog is disgusting, especially Americans. I sometimes wanted to step in and just say, hey, they're just 5, but I'm not risking an argument for minimum wage. I just hope the kids turn out alright.